Greetings and beyond the new, listeners of Gennfiction Audio Theatre. In case you missed the update video that I put up on Saturday, the role of Shiori will no longer be played by Drew Hill, as she is not really sent in any more lines after this and I can't get in touch with her anymore. So instead, from now on, chapter 14 here onwards, the role of Shiori will be played by Lexi Orta. Enjoy. And without further ado, on with the chapter. Final Exam, an Avatar: The Last Airbender fanfiction. Chapter 14.
Packing her things up took no time at all. Her creative supplies sealed and her clothes stuffed into her duffel bag, the only thing left to do was await her fate. Shiori nervously paced her small room. She had managed to stop the flow of hot, bitter tears, although the sleeve of her shirt still sported a damp swath from the wrist to the elbow. Her mind flitted erratically back and forth between her impending doom and the long-term consequences of her actions. Would she be imprisoned for striking the prince, or merely sent back to Symmetra in shame? Imagining Master Zoran's disappointment after he had afforded her the opportunity to prove herself made her almost wish for the former. Did this ship even have a brig? Maybe they would burn her or abandon her on an island somewhere. But far worse than her fear of punishment was the long-term consequence. She would never be Yuyan. Never. Shuyun had been right. She couldn't even behave herself for 1 month. And Keisuke, who was aware that she was following in his footsteps, would also know she had failed when she never took her place among the Yuyan's ranks. Tears threatened to reemerge. Would she ever see him again? Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she forced herself to stand still. Her inner turmoil refused to quiet, however. Hating the rising feeling of suffocating panic, Shiori tried desperately to refocus on her emotions of anger. Anger at Master Zoran for giving her such an impossible task. Anger at Zuko for being such an uncaring, insensitive jerk. Unfortunately, her thoughts came full circle back onto herself. How could she have been so stupid? She knew what was at stake. She knew what it would take to accomplish her goal and pass this test, and yet she still had failed. It made her sick with despair to think that Shiyun had been right all along, that her spirit was just too fiery to be a proper Yuyan. A tap at the door made her practically jump out of her skin. So, they had come for her. Taking another precautionary scrub across her eyes with her sleeves, Shiori turned to face the door, chin held slightly aloft. Perhaps she had failed her test of temperament, but that didn't mean she had to abandon all vestiges of self-respect. Hoping her eyes and face didn't look as miserable as they felt, she focused on the upper part of the doorframe, waiting quietly for her impending punishment. Another gentle tap, and then the metal door creaked open. A familiar shaved head poked in, and Shiori had difficulty suppressing a grimace, especially since his left cheek still sported a bit of a flush.
So he's come to witness the job himself, has he? Well, I suppose it's what I deserve.
The teen girl was surprised when the prince entered and shut the door behind him. Where were the soldiers to take her away and lock her up? Zuko regarded her for the briefest of moments before the sun-kissed eyes focused elsewhere. They stayed like that, the silence stretching awkwardly between them as the seconds ticked by. Finally, Prince Zuko cleared his throat. His eyes never strayed from the wall he faced as he addressed his temporary archer.
Look, from what I understand of our agreement, you're supposed to obey my orders as I give them. Is that correct?
Shiori suddenly found the entrance to her room to be entrancing.
Yes.
And this is a test of some kind? To see if you're worthy of further training?
Yes.
At this point, Zuko turned his head to face her, although she remained focused on her door.
The Avatar is my test. It's the only way to regain my honor. To be able to go home.
Silence. Shiori's brows were drawn down as she stared at the door. She could feel Zuko's gaze boring into the side of her face. It tickled her peripheral vision. Keeping her own eyes forward was becoming a challenge. What did Zuko want from her? She had royally messed up, failed. And since he seemed to believe that her only goal was usurping her brother's glory, Shiori would have thought he'd be glad to be rid of her. Instead of all the expected gloating, however, his tone was almost conciliatory. She didn't comprehend this at all.
To move on, I still need an archer, one who knows Yuyan ways, one who can help me track down and capture the Avatar. And you need to pass this test.
But I can't pass this test. I already failed.
In misery, Shiori turned to meet Zuko's gaze, hoping he'd understand that Master Zoran would not be as forgiving as the prince was apparently willing to be. Zuko gave her a brief smirk.
About your indiscretions. So long as we're successful on Misty Island. That means Zhao does not capture the Avatar. I do. Understand?
Shiori gave a slow nod. It was taking the reality of her second chance a while to sink in.
Camp, don't be. All I really need to know is whether or not his men are still there. If they are, the Avatar obviously hasn't been there yet. It's unlikely he'd have any Yuyan at his camp anyway. They'll be scattered throughout the island, lying in wait for their prey. So, having a Yuyan walk into his camp would probably be more suspicious than, say, a regular Fire Nation soldier.
Although Prince Zuko said this more to himself than her, Shiori felt a liberating amount of relief at his words. Passing her trial of serving Zuko would only gain her another year if Admiral Zhao caught her. But so long as she wasn't forced to expose herself to him, she felt her odds of discovery to be severely reduced.
Good. We'll arrive at the island in 4 hours. Here's a map of Misty Island. Study it. The Avatar will most likely arrive from the north or west. But that might not matter. Here's where my uncle says the main breeding grounds for the giant manta ray bats used to be.
Zuko pointed to a red encircled area on the map. This time, Shiori paid attention.
Are still on the island. That is when we'll concentrate our search.
Zuko glanced at the younger team. Although her eyes still retained their red-rimmed look, no evidence of fresh tears appeared. Grateful for that, at least, the banished boy wondered idly if his uncle would have approved of his approach to the problem. It seemed like a fair solution to him. He overlooked the girl's non-Yuyan-like behavior, and in exchange, he didn't have to utter the words, "I'm sorry," for his completely off-base accusations in regards to the girl's relationship with her older brother. A fresh start for both of them, so to speak. And most importantly, the playing field against Zhao, although still tilted significantly in the Admiral's favor, was more even than it would have been without the quasi-Yuyan's help.
Anything that might help the mission.
After thinking a couple of minutes, Shiori answered slowly.
Once fully trained, a Yuyan isn't bound by the rule of silence, but there are far more likely to stay quiet than not. So if you and your men wear faceplates, they probably won't mention the fact that Fire Nation soldiers are prowling the island to Admiral Zhao. They'll remain focused on their own mission. The Yuyan are weapons. Right now, those weapons are pointed at the Avatar. They won't deviate from that.
Zuko frowned thoughtfully.
No ambition for recognition or personal glory, huh? No wonder Zhao wanted them so badly.
The look Shiori gave the prince was completely guileless.
The Yuyan are the best archers in the world. Only the very best of the best make it through the training system and achieve their goal. What more need for glory could there be?
The forward hold of Zuko's ship was completely dark, the torches extinguished, the steel doors shut and sealed. No light permeated the oppressive black. Curious, Shiori waved her hand in front of her face, unable to see the gesture. Silence also ruled, although not the absolute stillness of what the Yuyan were capable. 7 firebenders plus Zuko waited with Shiori in the ship's prow. No one spoke, but she could hear them shifting about nervously. Someone was humming softly to himself. Another man jangled as he adjusted his gear. Beyond that, only the hum of the engines and the sounds of waves breaking against the hull could be heard. At General Iroh's suggestion, the Komodo rhinos had been left in their pens. He had pointed out that there was no telling if Admiral Zhao's men, if they were on the island at all, possessed mounts. Plus, the myopic beasts were nearly blind at night, no good at all for this kind of mission. The waves were breaking across the bow with more force now, the ship buckling into the tide. The hull scraped loudly against the bottom, the harsh noise echoing loudly in the hollow metal chamber. Shiori crouched down, preparing for landing. the ship shuddered as the engines were thrown in reverse.
No!
The front of the ship cracked open as the boarding ramp groaned into position. In comparison to the pitch black they had been waiting in, the night sky seemed to shine with light, even though the moon was waning. Shiori was ashore even before the ramp had completely descended. She took a quick glance up and down the rock-strewn beach before taking off for the woods at a crouching sprint. She scanned the thick vegetation, veering to the left as she spotted a perfect tree. Drawing back her prepared arrow without breaking her stride, Shiori let fly, the white, fletching and trailing rope making the missile easy to track. She slowed her pace, only to ease her way into the thick undergrowth. Here, progress became harder. There wasn't enough light to see by and not enough time to properly feel her way through. Her shirt and pants became dampened from brushing past thick foliage. Her arms scratched by unseen thorns and sharp twigs. Still, she pushed through until she reached the base of her chosen tree. Standing motionless, she could hear Zuko and his men crossing the beach. Louder still were the metallic sounds of the ship's bow shifting back into place. Shiori found her dangling spider monkey rope. She gave it a couple of firm tugs before climbing upwards hand over hand, taking care not to touch the thick layer of moss and lichen on the tree's trunk. Heaving herself up into its sturdy limbs, she chose a nook which enabled her to see the beach and the ground directly beneath the tree. Then, she pulled her arrow free and carefully wound up her rope. Settling her back against the trunk, she waited. As Zuko's ship began to slowly withdraw from the island, the prince and his men entered the forest, following after Shiori. They made a lot of noise, the young archer noted with a wince, but under the circumstance, that was almost a good thing. Everything was going according to plan. The firebenders made their way single file, passing the tree in which Shiori was hidden. Errant streams of moonlight penetrated the dense foliage and glinted off their white faceplates, making the protective pieces look even more like skulls than usual.
Shiori.
Here.
Pressed against the thick trunk the way she was, Shiori doubted that Zuko could see her. He nodded to acknowledge her presence and then moved on. The girl settled back to wait, listening, as the prince and his firebenders moved farther and farther away. The sounds of the forest slowly returned as the disturbing humans distanced themselves from the beach. Shiori sat and listened as she scanned the beach by quarters, knowing that her peripheral vision would be much better at picking up movement at night than her forward sight. Although the crashing waves provided serious competition, the chorus of life became the dominant sound. She recognized a few of the species, but most were alien to her. Of course, that mattered not. The point was that she could hear them. They served as her rear sentries. Even the stealthiest of humans would be unable to slip through the forest without silencing the smaller creatures' calls. Still, Shiori expected them to come to the beach, if they came at all. She sat and waited, shifting her weight every now and then to keep her muscles from aching. A heavy mist was settling on her. She could feel it weighing down her hair and leaching through her already damp clothes faster than her body's heat could compensate for it. Goosebumps rose on her skin as the cool breeze blew in off the ocean. Her nose, responding to the dampness, began to run. Frowning, she resisted the urge to sniffle, instead wiping it with the edge of her sleeve. She was glad that her quiver of arrows was protected by a flap of oilskin. Despite her discomfort, the 14-year-old kept her eyes forward, steadfastly maintaining her vigil. She was key to the plan. The honor of being the one assigned this crucial role had not escaped her. This mission on Misty Island was her one and only chance to pass her temperance test and move on with her Yuyan training. After this, she would be returned to Master Zoran and General Iroh would give his report, sealing her fate. That was all the motivation she required to stay alert. The plan was an iffy one, totally dependent on there being a Yuyan in the general vicinity. If they were around, they would be attracted to the beach by not-so-subtle sounds of Zuko's ship. Although fallible, this test had the potential of easily answering the question of whether or not Zhao's commandeered archers were here. Meanwhile, Prince Zuko and his firebenders would be splitting into teams, heading in different directions before making camp for the night. Come dawn, they would all be fully engaged in the search for the Avatar. Shiori did not have to wait nearly so long, however, for her reconnaissance to pay off. Her peripheral vision caught some motion on the beach, and she immediately refocused her eyes. Darting wraith-like through the mist-shrouded moonlight, 3 shadowy forms made their way to the landing site. They crouched, becoming part of the rocky beach for a moment, then moved towards the tree line. With obvious ease, they tracked the path of Zuko and his men, slipping out of Shiori's sight as they entered the forest. She stiffened in her perch as the chorus of insects suddenly fell silent. Tracking in the dense vegetation without the aid of light would be nearly impossible, but the Yuyan were not known as the best of the best for nothing. She heard them not, but sensed their presence below her. The forest around her was unnaturally hushed, as if it too had joined her in holding its breath. Shiori stared straight out, resisting the oh-so-tempting urge to peer downward. Some people possess the knack of knowing when the eyes of another rested upon them. She could not take that risk. They moved on slowly, following the path Zuko and his men had carelessly blazed. Shiori, still undetected, remained motionless in her tree. She waited until the insects resumed their songs, and then she lingered in place for longer still. Paranoia ate at her. What if they knew she was up there? What if someone was watching even now? A chill that had nothing to do with pervasive mist crept up and down her spine. She shook it off with an effort. Finally, she moved, tying a loop into the end of her spider monkey rope and lowering herself out of the tree. Reaching the ground without incident, she coiled up her rope. Then, stooping, she fell around the damp ground until she came up with 3 rocks. Stacking one on top of the other, she then placed one to the side facing her former perch. One of Zuko's best trackers was supposed to return here at dawn, and she did not trust him to find her a specific tree without aid. Lastly, she took out an arrow. Using her own strength, she stabbed the metal head into the bark, wiggling it free only to turn the arrow over 90 degrees and repeat the process, creating a small distinctive X. It was a Yuyan sign, invisible to those who did not know where to look. Fortunately, Shiori had already shown the man what to scan for, and they had agreed upon what it would mean. One arrowhead mark indicated no Yuyan had crossed her path. The crosshatched shape she had just made would let Zuko know about their presence. The girl grimaced slightly. The Yuyan were a secretive organization, so secretive that their students who completed all 5 years of training and yet failed the final exam had their dominant hands physically altered to prevent them from teaching Yuyan techniques to outsiders. Shiori had skipped a year. Her training was as of yet incomplete, with the most advanced secrets still a mystery to her, so she had hoped this would not apply to her should she fail here. After dedicating so much time to mastering her craft, the concept of life without archery was abhorrent to her. Despite Prince Zuko's insistence on the necessity of the information, she very much doubted Master Zoran would be pleased to know she had divulged a Yuyan trail sign to a simple soldier. Letting out a sigh, she slipped her arrow back into her quiver. The Yuyan were here. That meant that she was about to attempt to thwart her elder brethren from their given task, defying her future commander in order to serve her current temporary one. The arrow mark trail sign was the least of her worries. With a shake of her head, she glided deeper into the forest.
Final Exam was written by Magnusrae. Avatar: The Last Airbender is owned by Nickelodeon, Michael Dante DiMartino, and Brian Konietzko. The narrator for this story is Makeya Royer. The voice of Shiori is Lexi Orta. The voice of Zuko is DCODE. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.